When it comes to multiplayer games, each player is required to have their own controller. However, some inventive games allow for multiplayer gaming by sharing a controller. It might sound a little strange, but here are 7 simultaneous multiplayer games that can be played by only needing one controller/console. The makers of the infamous Souls series weren't always so dark and brooding, as they created The Adventures of Cookie and Cream on PS2, a bright and colorful, lighthearted, co-op-based puzzle platformer featuring 2 flamboyant bunnies. This is one of those perfect games to play with a spouse or friend, as each rabbit must work together to clear each stage. When playing solo, controlling both rabbits at the same time is tricky, as each rabbit is assigned to an analog stick. However, 2 players can play cooperatively by holding their own controller or by sharing the same controller, with each player using one analog stick and their set of shoulder buttons. It's a fun, simple game, and up to 4 players can compete in the verse mode by sharing 2 controllers or by using the PS2 multi-tap. Also, there was a port on Nintendo DS simply titled Cookie and Cream, but it wasn't as good as the PS2 original. Either way, this is a sleeper hit for sure, and the 2 players on one controller is an innovative way to play this solid co-op game. Similar to The Adventures of Cookie and Cream, Death Squared is a puzzle game in which you need to move cubes to solve puzzles, each assigned to an analog stick on the same controller. While it isn't advertised as a 2-player co-op experience, who's to stop you from sharing a controller with a buddy, and it makes solving these puzzles much easier. Death Squared was released on many platforms, and it was the free Xbox Gold giveaway game in 2018, so it's readily available if you wanted to try it for yourself.
Oh man, these guys are taking the intelligence out of artificial intelligence.
The first Micro Machines game on the original Game Boy was unique because it was one of the few games to support the 4-player link adapter. But also, Micro Machines and its sequel, Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament, took it a step further by including a mode where 2 players can simultaneously compete using one Game Boy. Player 1 uses the D-pad, while Player 2 uses the A and B buttons to control left and right steering. Acceleration is handled automatically. Player 2 can even use the start button to brake. Unfortunately, both these Micro Machines games are tough to play, especially on the original non-backlit Game Boy, because the game doesn't give the player time to react to turns due to the faster gameplay speed. You simply can't see where you're going, and you're going to spend most of the time spinning off track. But even though it's not the best racing game ever made, this 2 players on one Game Boy was a forward way of thinking back in the early 90s. It's a shame that the GBA port of Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo didn't include a single-pack link multiplayer mode, but it got the next best thing: 2 players using one Game Boy. When selecting the Versus mode, as opposed to the multi-pack link cable mode, Player 1 uses the D-pad and the L shoulder button, while Player 2 moves pieces left and right with the A and B buttons and the R shoulder button. Tapping the shoulder button causes the pieces to rotate, while holding it forces it to drop quickly. It's a creative way to play local multiplayer, and it works better than you might assume. Granted, you're going to want to play this on an original horizontal GBA for the best results, as using a GBA SP or a Game Boy Micro is a little uncomfortable thanks to the size and shape of those systems. By playing through the single-player campaign, there are 4 unlockable 2-on-1 multiplayer micro games found in WarioWare Inc. Mega Micro Games on GBA. Player 1 uses the L button and Player 2 uses R. All these games only use this one button. The Versus Vacuum Cleaner game tasks both players to pick up pieces of trash with a rotating vacuum, pressing a single button to launch in the direction of the arrow. The goal of Chicken Race is to try to stop as close to the edge as possible without going over by properly holding the shoulder button like a pinball launcher. Basically, you want to release when the foot is at its reddest. Versus Dong Dong uses one button to push blocks on your opponent's side with a stick that automatically moves up and down. You want to hit a block 3 times to win. And Versus Hurdle has each player jumping hurdles with proper timing. The mud pits can slow you down, but rapidly tapping the shoulder button increases speed. These are all micro games after all, so they're not designed to hold your attention for long, but they are creative, and needing only one system, only one button, is brilliant design. Bomb Monkey is a fun little 3DS eShop puzzle game made by the same creator as Mutant Mudds and Chicken Wiggle. Like Super Puzzle Fighter 2, Player 1 uses the D-pad while Player 2 mans the face buttons. After stacking boxes of varying colors, they can be exploded with bombs and combos can be created. Unfortunately, now that the 3DS eShop is closed, playing this 2 players on 1 console option is a little more difficult these days since the game hasn't been ported or released anywhere else. The final game on this list is sort of cheating slightly. The Xbox 360 saw re-releases of several classic arcade games in the early days of Xbox Live Arcade, Robotron 2084 being one of them. Uniquely, this twin-stick shooter featured an online co-op multiplayer mode that essentially shared one controller over the online connection. One player would control movement while the second player would control the shooting. Ideally, you'd want to coordinate using headsets since this game requires split-second decision-making. So technically 2 controllers are needed to play this unique only co-op mode, so I'm breaking the rules a little bit here on my multiplayer list, but you can see the point. Unfortunately, many of these classic arcade re-releases on Xbox have been delisted. There were even some achievements tied to the co-op mode. But seeing a revival of classic Robotron with online leaderboards and online co-op were really cool features to include upon original release. Let's hope they make a return someday. So these were just a few multiplayer games to share one controller. But what other 2-on-1 multiplayer games are out there? If you know of any more, please leave a note in the comments because I couldn't find a list like this anywhere. These are cool, unconventional ways to play multiplayer games, but there's so little documentation out there. So what do you say we work together and get a list going? And you know what else was an underappreciated multiplayer feature? The Game Boy Advance's single-pack link multiplayer mode. If you wanted to learn all about this unique multiplayer feature that only requires 1 game pack for up to 4 players, check out my dedicated single-pack playlist right here on my channel. There are just over 100 GBA games that support this feature, and I covered each and every one of them. Links will be in the description. Until next time, thank you for watching, and game on.
How'd you get that many at a time?